Hello, and welcome to the Umbrella Podcast, the podcast that talks about education, English teaching, and the different aspects regarding the quality of our educational context. I am Habib Hakiran, and in today's episode, we will talk about ESL and EFL programs and experiences in Texas and in Costa Rican schools. Today with me is Miss Tracey Jones and Mr. Richard Strot. They are professionals, academics from the Texas University in Waco, Texas. So, Miss Tracey, how are you doing today?
I am really well, thank you. I'm excited to be here.
And Mrs. Strud, how are you doing today?
Well, thank you. I'm doing very well also. And again, very happy to be here as part of this podcast.
Thank you so much for joining us. And then Miss Isabel Badilla is joining us. She's from the National University of Costa Rica, or Universidad Nacional, and she's an academic from this university as well. We will be discussing all about our experiences in the teaching English world. Miss Isa, how are you today?
Hi. Happy to be here. Thank you for the opportunity to share some time with Tracey and Rick, and of course with you too.
Thank you so much. So, Mr. Strut, can I call you Rick?
Yes, please do.
Rick, thank you. So, what is for you ESL?
All right. So English as a second language, of course, is what ESL signifies. And so any person who comes from a other language background other than English and is in a school in the United States would be considered to have English as a second language because their home language is not English. So we define English as a second language based on the language that's spoken in the home and the language that's spoken most often by the child to their parents. And a questionnaire is sent out to every family the first time they enroll one of their children in a public school in Texas or in all of the United States. And if either question indicates a language other than English being spoken in the home, then the child is tested for their English proficiency. And if they, according to the test results and teacher observation, then they could go into an ESL program with a teacher who's trained to teach content at the same time that students are learning English.
Miss Jones, can I call you Miss Jones or?
Yes, that is wonderful. Or Tracey is also great.
Tracey, thank you. Okay, Tracey, what is the importance of ESL being applied in schools or in high schools, all in the US?
Yeah, I think that English as a second language instruction has been of great importance for a long time. I think that historically, it wasn't really until maybe the 1960s that there were concrete policies in states and from the federal government that, you know, children who were in public schools had a right to access in the curriculum in and through English, and that we as teachers and schools needed to make accommodations for students who might be immigrant children or have that home language that was not English. And so the importance has been there. It's really very recent. And then the intentional training of teachers to have certification in these very specific skills to teach English and teach content. So for example, science, the process of photosynthesis, and making that comprehensible in and through English for all students has been more of a movement in probably the last 40 or 50 years. And even so, there is a little bit of a struggle for sure to get enough teachers who have that training and certification to teach English in particular methods for students who are learning it as a second or third or even fourth language in our public schools. So that's a challenge that we're definitely up against.
Well, I see. And I want to ask Miss Isa, what for you is the difference between ESL and EFL
Well,
to get a little bit of context?
here in Costa Rica is English as a foreign language. EFL stands for English as a foreign language. So most of the people in our public system, they don't speak English. So they're learning the language. Their native language is Spanish. So they're learning a foreign language. And mostly in Costa Rica, what is promoted is English. It's different, definitely. Listening to Tracey is different, very different, the way that we approach the language here in Costa Rica, even though the policies that we have right now says that hopefully in around 10, 15 years, the government think that Costa Rica is going to be bilingual, that everybody will be speaking English. That will be the ideal. It's a whole process, and the programs have changed, and teachers are getting trained, and now we have a program, an English program in public schools that is more complete, I would say, to the standards, to the worldwide standards. So we talk about the common European framework of reference that we took into account in these new programs. And well, it's a challenge, I think, for Costa Rica. It's difficult too, and it's going to be difficult to have like good results in I would say evaluations that probably the students will have soon, because of the pandemic, because of these 2 years that in Costa Rica, in some documents that they evaluate everything that is happening right now in Costa Rica with all this pandemic and all the changes in the educational system that have done the government and everybody. They talk about an apagón educativo. It's like we are there, but just getting into what we want to do. So they have like different programs and programs, like 4-year programs, in order to balance the whole system because of what we've been living lately. But it's different, definitely. The opportunities are different. Learning a foreign language in Costa Rica is challenging, especially because teachers, they deal with a lot of students in the class, and teachers don't have their own home, like their own rooms to work. So they have to move from one class to another class to another class. And there are different programs for people in the Gran Área Metropolitana, like in the center of the country, and it's very different for rural areas. So right now, because of the policies that we have, now they are making, the government is thinking about how can we make things better and more fair for students in all around the country to learn this English mostly.
Thank you so much. I want to hear more about what Mr. Rick told a little bit ago about contextualization, how it is important for students to have a contextualized curriculum and approximation from the teacher to create this environment that they can develop their skills. How contextualization or a contextualized curriculum is helpful for students. I'm sorry, you have your microphone off.
There we go. How's that? Let me start by saying that when we think about learning a second language, and particularly in terms of schools, we talk about two kinds of learning. One is basic interpersonal communication skills, the kind of English that you use every day among friends, discourse in public areas, going into stores, survival skills in English, but basic interpersonal communication skills. Students pick this up fairly rapidly and not necessarily from the teacher. They develop these skills on the playground and in the context of the community, which is English speaking. Now, the cognitive academic skills, that's what we deal with in teaching content, in teaching math and science and social studies. And that's the hard part. Teachers in Texas are all required to have a supplemental certification in teaching English as a second language. Well, I'm sorry, not required in the whole state, but a school district will no longer hire you if you do not have ESL certification, because the state has mandated that all teachers must have ESL certification. So that's one step in the right direction, is helping helping teachers understand how to present content in a way that is comprehensible to the level of their students. And the whole key to this is that phrase, comprehensible, or as you put it, in context. If it's in context, it's going to be comprehensible. There's going to be things within the environment to reference. There's going to be dialogue with people that will support your understanding. There may be pictures shown. There may be lots of different aids used, but the teacher will do their best to make sure that you're understanding and comprehending what is being said. Because if not, then no learning will take place. It's interesting in the United States, as you may or may not know, people in the United States have not been particularly eager to learn second languages. In fact, our aversion to second languages is probably one of the worst things about Americans. They expect everybody to speak English where they go, as a stereotype, I'm saying. Okay. So, so this idea of becoming biliterate and bilingual is rather new in the United States. In fact, it took a decision by the Supreme Court to mandate that students be taught in their native language until their English is strong enough to transition to only English. So that's what I'm saying. It took a Supreme Court case to make this happen. That case was decided in the 1970s. In the 1980s, implementation had pretty much been done. So we have now about 20 years of having teachers who are ESL trained and offering bilingual programs to students who need bilingual education. And it's interesting, we have so many Spanish speakers, but that court case was brought by a Chinese American family. Because their child did not speak English, they said, well, we need to have a teacher who speaks Chinese, and they won their case. And so because of that, we now have bilingual programs in all of the United States. So a little background there.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I see, and I can connect this background with a little bit of what Ms. Tracey was saying about a movement, about how the EFL is becoming or is now a movement. So I want to hear a little bit more about this movement idea. What are the most or the common difficulties of the day-to-day or the daily basis of a teacher that want to be part of this movement and to provide quality in their education?
I'm happy to respond to that. I have maybe an interesting background. I live in Texas now, but I'm originally from Los Angeles, California, where I had most of my education, and I taught ESL and Spanish at the high school level. And that was very interesting. That really varies sort of region to region. And at the time when I was teaching that, I was living in Northern California, where a lot of wine is made. And we would have a lot of immigrant workers come to that area with their families at certain times during the year, usually around February. And so our school year starts in August, but I would get brand new students who needed English ESL in February, March, April. And they were teens, 14, 15, 16 years old. And so their needs were very different. They needed to develop what Mr. Strot was talking about very quickly, that basic interpersonal skills to be able to communicate at school with teachers and with peers, but also on behalf of their families as well, to serve in some capacity as a translator sometimes. And so that was an interesting experience. And they needed, a lot of times at this public school system in which I worked, we didn't have materials for ESL that were appropriate for that age group. So finding content that wasn't a children's book, even though that might have been the level of English that the students needed to acquire, it needed to be appropriate and not insulting to those students, to motivate them to want to learn and experience more. And then in the last few years at the University in Texas, they've developed a bridge program for international students who may not have scored exactly high enough on the TOEFL exam, so the test of English as a foreign language. So if they haven't tested quite high enough on that exam, they don't get direct admittance. They need to go through this English bridge program, which is a series of three semesters, but a student might start out in the middle and progress a little more quickly. But those students predominantly that I've taught have been from Asia, from China, Korea, and Vietnam. And they have had English as a foreign language for most of their lives, but they're 19 and 20 years old coming to the university, and they need to have that academic English to be able to sit next to one of my students who's lived in Texas his whole life and be able to compete academically at the same or similar level as that student. And of course, university professors may or may not have experience with making content comprehensible to English learners. And so it's a huge challenge. And so in that program, we not only teach and try to really polish their English skills at an academic space, but also to give them strategies for being successful as United States college students, which are almost cultural things that we have. In fact, there are a couple of courses that are called transition courses. And in terms of advocating for these students, I've gone to different departments where our students like to major, which are popular majors for these international students. And a lot of them are in the business school, in the accounting department. And so I've gone to the accounting department and done a workshop about where the students are coming from, what they might know about writing a paper, what they might not realize culturally about plagiarism in writing a formal paper. And so at that level, the university instructors need some training. And that sort of happens a little intermittently. And as we receive more students after the pandemic, it wanes, we pray. We need to be doing that more, right? So that these students are having the, a similar academic experience to students who have lived here their whole lives, because at the end of their time here, they will all earn the same degree. They'll have the same diploma from the same university. And so we want to have some equity there in their instruction. And then finally, I was going to share recently, in the last few years, I also teach Spanish at the university. Spanish is a foreign language. And I've taken my students to a local primary school where they have pre-K, pre-kinder, and kinder is a dual language program. and my students read to the kids and prepare a lesson. And none of my students are education majors, but I just train them how to do it. They're Spanish students. And so that's been amazing for my students who are predominantly monolingual and who have had a really traditional sort of public school upbringing in the US to go into a dual language, to a bilingual context, right? Where 4 and 5-year-olds are able to do more than the 20-year-old college students can do with Spanish. And it's very humbling. And it's nice for both sides to enjoy that contact in English and Spanish and engage in a bilingual manner, which, you know, as Mr. Strot was saying, in a society that seems to value monolingualism and push that in a lot of policies and daily life, I think it's really important for all of our students, not just our education students, to have some experience in a multilingual context, because that gives us a really different perspective about what English learners might be experiencing from kids to adults.
Yes, I see, and I cannot agree more with that. I want to hear about a little bit more about what are these difficulties that Costa Rican students have been suffering from this educational shutdown that the coronavirus pandemic happened to give us, and what are the difficulties in these goals that the Costa Rican government wants us to apply in schools, to be a bilingual society. And I want to ask Miss Isa, what are what are for you these difficulties, the main difficulties to be a bilingual society, and to work a little bit more on not being this monolingual, or to reproduce these monolingual behaviors that we sometimes happen to reproduce?
Okay, let me see. For our children, it's very difficult to learn the language because there are a lot of things that need to be taken into account. The most of schools in Costa Rica, they have between 3 and 5 lessons per week of English, only 40 minutes. And that's not enough. And then that's one aspect to be taken into account. Another aspect is the mediation that the teacher has in order to do, you know, to present the content to our students to achieve the goals. And then that's why the MEP now is making all these teachers' guides so that we go step by step and we don't jump any of the phases, because all the phases are very important, and they're important because we're constantly using the language. And another thing that needs to be taken into account is the English level of our English teachers, because not all teachers have good English level. And that means that some of our children are learning English in Spanish and coloring copies or just working in books, and they don't really use the language to communicate as a social tool to transform our society. So there's a whole philosophy behind this, there is an approach behind this. And we as a society, we need to change the way we think in order to provide more opportunities to use the language, at least with the kids in public schools. There are schools that only have 3 classes per week, only 3 classes per week. And the teacher has to be very conscious. And then it comes the contextualization you were talking about. Because they start teaching and teaching, they don't even follow the program, or they don't take the time to read the program. They don't understand the program. And the goal is not just to learn vocabulary, is to use the vocabulary as a means to communicate with others in simple and in a clear way. So we need to understand that. and teachers just go to the class and they show a flashcard and they say like dog and cat and cow, and that's it. And the context, no context. And then it's impossible. It's impossible to have a meaningful instruction in that sense. So if we are here in Valle Central, here in Heredia, in San Jose, it's very different what we have in every day in our houses, in the street, is different from people who live by the border of Nicaragua or people who live in rural areas. So you cannot just go there and talk about mall. What do you see in the mall? If they don't have a mall, they have a pulperia, a little pulperia where they can buy stuff. So the teacher needs to have that magic, that will, for me, it's to put some brightness in their eyes and a smile in their faces, that they are enjoying what they do. I think an English teacher, if it is in the United States, if it is in Costa Rica, wherever an English teacher needs to use the body language is important, very important, because you're in front of the class. You don't want to translate because that's not what you want to do. You want them to learn the language. So you can say like good, and this, everybody knows that this is good, so good. And if it is not good, you go like with your face like so you know, and children understand. So I think we have a lot of challenges still, like a lot of things to face still as a country in order to achieve the goal of being bilingual. And what I think is that right now, because of COVID-19, what we need to do is to stop activism, stop doing activities just because you want to do activities in the class. You plan your lessons, 2-3 activities. 3 activities for 40 minutes, it's all right. But then you bring into the classroom a lot of opportunities where students can use the language and the materials. You don't need to spend a lot of time, because that's one of the complaints of teachers. We don't have money to buy materials. You don't need a lot of materials. You just need to bring into the classroom a lot of opportunities for the students to use the language. So I think we need to stop, you know, like this crisis, and just go slowly, but you know, but in a good way, slowly, but in Spanish will be como despacio pero firme, right? That we do stuff in the teaching in a more conscious way, not just to go there and okay, I finished unit 1, I finished unit 2, I finished unit 3, I'm done with the program. And then you ask the students, hello, how are you? And they say 5 years old. And then you're like, all right, good. You know, because this is very typical of the kids, that they always confuse those questions. But then you go slow, and every day you practice, and every day you ask your students, what did you do yesterday? Let's remember, we were talking about animals. What animals do? And then, and what color is the animal? And it's okay if you ask about numbers, even though you're not studying numbers. Nobody's gonna die if you ask for numbers. How many cats can you see in the picture? 3 cats. And what colors are they? So it's this thing that the teachers, and any teacher, not only English teachers, but whoever is in front of a class should have this passion for what she or he is doing, and should feel like the wonders of knowledge, because it's not that you are taking your knowledge and put it into the students, it's that you are building knowledge together. You are resignificando, which I don't know how to say that in English, what you had, and then having different perspective now. And then the cat is not the same cat, because now we have the story of the cat that lives in your house. So my cat, my imaginary cat, because I don't have cats, I have dogs, it's different from the first idea that I had from a cat, because now I know your story. So it has to do with that. I think that right now, education all over the world lost the love and the passion that a teacher should have. And then I really suggest that teachers go back and read Paulo Freire, super apasionado, his passion for education. And Maturana, for example, that he talks about the school and the emotions. Oh my goodness, we're not allowed to feel emotions anymore in school. No, 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 no time. We need to finish. We need to study. We need to learn. No llore, don't cry. Nothing happened. It's okay. Continue, continue. And that's not all right. I think we need to humanize, I guess is the word, education again.
Well, thank you so much for those beautiful words. I want to add a little bit about what is the purpose of this podcast. The main people that listen to this podcast are students, college students that are going to be teachers. So because of the pandemic, this pandemic, we lost this opportunity to go outside the academia and to visit schools, to visit communities that happen to have a lot of difficulties to receive education. So that's why we come up with this idea to collect all different voices of the educational environment, all context or world, the educational world. So that's why I want to ask Mr. Rick, what for you is the purpose of the school to the community? What is the importance that school have for the community?
I should start by saying that unlike most other countries, the United States does not have a national education system. Each state is like its own country when it comes to education. And not only that, but each state is divided into school districts, and a local school board makes many of the decisions as to what kinds of programs they will have, what kinds of textbooks they will adopt, and so on, as long as it's within the law. There are certain things they have to do, but there are certain things they don't necessarily have to do, but they can do. For example, local school boards are perfectly allowed to put in a bilingual program that is open to both monolingual English and monolingual Spanish students, so that the English only students would learn Spanish and become bilingual, and vice versa for the Spanish speaking students. There's not enough parent support to demand that in most districts. In some there are. For example, in the large cities, Austin, Dallas, Houston have these kinds of bilingual programs. But when you get out into the smaller rural communities, bilingual does not have the priority. Legally, they're obligated, but it does not have the priority that it does in the larger cities. So there's that to contend with. So ESL is something that is mandated. We have a lot of teachers who are passionate about teaching students who come from other language backgrounds. And in Texas, of course, most of our students that we deal with are bilingual Spanish-English, but we also have a population on the Gulf Coast that are Vietnamese English. And so we have bilingual programs in Vietnamese for them. We're obligated by law, if you have 20 students or more at any grade level who speak the same language at home, you're obligated by law to provide a bilingual education program for those students. So legally, every school district, if they have that 20 or more who come from another language background, have to provide bilingual. If they don't meet that criteria, they have to provide ESL. And in Texas, what we have is known as a transitional bilingual program. Students go into bilingual for 3 to 4 years until their English is sufficient enough, or their cognitive, their content, academic English is strong enough for them to transition into all English classrooms. So we do not maintain bilingual through the years. We try to transition students into English after 3 or 4 years in a bilingual program.
And what is this importance that these programs, these 3 or 5 year programs that you were saying, are applied in schools, not at college level, are applied in schools, right?
Yes, that's in school. I'm talking about that the elementary, secondary, public schools. So if you go to a public school and you're from another language background, by law, you have to receive either bilingual ed or English as a second language from teachers trained in ESL. So I don't know, does that answer your question?
Yes, and I have another question. So these teachers need to be bilingual in this specific context, right?
If it's a bilingual program, the teacher has to be fluent in both languages. If it's ESL, the teacher does not have to know the other language. Now, it's helpful, but it's not required. You can teach ESL without being bilingual.
In these 3 years or 4 years that it's like the transition, did students receive any other content like science, like math?
Yes. The academics are taught within the ESL program. So bilingually, they would receive some instruction. Say they would get they would have Spanish language arts, English language arts. They might have social studies in English, math in Spanish. There would be a mixture of how the content areas were delivered, but they would be delivered bilingually, if you're in an ESL situation, they would be delivered by a teacher who has received training in English as a second language instruction.
Oh, I see. Now I want to ask Ms. Tracey, for you, what's this difference in the student outcome, like from elementary and college level? Let me tell you an example. I am not an English speaker. I don't know anything about English, but I go to Baylor, for example, to learn or to get my degree, and I register on your program, right? I have to go to this bridge phase, right? So my question is, what are the differences between an elementary student and a college student or school in contrast to college, and the difficulties that any of these students can have in the process?
Right. I think that there are very natural challenges that come into play, right? If we have these several years where children, maybe in pre-kinder or kinder through 2nd, 3rd, 4th grade in our elementary schools, are receiving English as a second language supports and learning content by a trained teacher, learning math, but in English, but with very specific, like Ms. Isabel was saying, with visuals and making the content very clear and using manipulatives to teach the math, to teach any subject, making it really comprehensible, then, that can be very successful throughout. But again, the child is very fortunate if every one of the teachers throughout that process has been fully certified and maybe had a lot of experience. And, so it can be an uneven experience. And then what if the child arrives to the school in 3rd grade and hasn't had the benefit of those previous 3 or 4 years of instruction? Their student is unavoidably at a disadvantage unless they're getting supports in other places, maybe through some home instruction, or teachers have identified that and they're trying to do supports maybe outside of the regular classroom. And yeah, so at the university level, at least what in my experience, the university students need to have had a certain amount of English before they would even be accepted to the university in any case. So the first gateway is that TOEFL score, right? The teaching of English as a foreign language, that exam that they take in their home country, receive a score, and then apply to universities in the United States. And for some, that score may be high enough that they get that direct admission. And for others where that score is not high enough, they go into this bridge program. But yes, there are a lot of things, right? I think in that program, students can feel very isolated, right? Because they're in kind of an intensive English program and only really associate with students in that program. So are they learning sort of colloquialisms and the local slang of 19-year-olds and understanding the traditions at the university? Maybe, but that almost needs to be something intentional that university English instructors for that particular program are infusing into our instruction. And so a lot of times what I'll do with the help of Mr. Strot and other colleagues is I'll set up conversation partners for those students so that at least once a week, they are hanging out with an American student who's a mainstream university student. And that gives, it's a little bit of a cultural exchange, right? And a language exchange, and having some empathy for the English learner, you know, that my students might get from that. And then the English learner is getting to go to the movies with a mainstream American student. They're going on a hike in the local park with a mainstream American student. They're going to grab some coffee. And these are all these conversations where they get to ask the questions about words and things that they've heard, but maybe did not fully understand. And it's in a safer environment because it's only one-on-one and no one's grading anybody. And but having those intentional experiences for students becomes almost just as important as those academic skills that they need to develop in English as well. So
yeah, I see. Thank you. Thank you. I want to ask Ms. Isa, what are these difficulties that we teachers or future teachers need to consider in order to provide this quality in education, specifically in EFL, in the EFL program, or teaching English as a foreign language?
Difficulties as teachers. I'm sorry. I was talking about this yesterday with.
Could I ask a question real quickly?
Yes.
Isabel, when you're answering that question, would you say a little bit about the use of textbooks, English textbooks in Costa Rican schools, how teachers use those or don't use them, one or the other?
All right. Well, in Costa Rica, there are some public schools that use a book. I don't know which book is that one, but we don't have a book. We don't have a textbook for English teaching because the goal is to speak English, to speak the language, to listen to it, to understand it, and to be able to speak. If you write it and if you read in English, oof, good, great. You are a B2 probably, right? According to the European framework of reference, because in primary schools in Costa Rica, supposedly by the end of the 6 years that we are in primary school, our primary school goes from first, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth grade. The students will be A2 in the English level, proficiency level. When they finish high school, we have primary school and high school. And high school will be 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 11th, most of our high schools. And they will be B1, B2. So the English from teachers is expected to be C1, C2, right? The English proficiency level. So it's high, very high. But we don't use textbooks like an official textbook. And Ticos, we don't use like a lot of books in the sense like storybooks. That's my thing. I teach one course that is called children's literature. So I read stories every week for my students. And they are like this because they know we don't have like that practice of reading stories. But textbooks like that, teachers probably take a little bit from here, take a little bit from here. They make some copies, they put them all together, and that's what they use in order to teach the language. But as far as I know, no textbook, officially textbook in Costa Rica to teach English in primary school. And the difficulties, I think it depends on the person, it depends on the place, it depends on the children, it depends on so many things, Javi, because a teacher should be a good communicator. A teacher should be a good listener. A teacher should be should know how to work as a team, not only with other teachers, but also with the students. So sometimes it's difficult for a person to do that, to listen, really, really listen, like the ability to listen to the other person, and to be able to recognize the other person as what that person is, what that person is coming from, the needs that that person has, like our students, the little ones, our children. So I think that our context is very diverse, even though they all speak Spanish, most of them. We have some people from China, we might have some people from Puerto Rico, we might have some people from Venezuela, but I mean, most of them speak Spanish. So that's not like very bad for the teacher. But they have like different backgrounds, and there are a lot of children that are coming to our schools, which, and their parents, they don't read or write. So the teacher has to be able to develop a strategy to communicate with them. Teaching English. If you don't know English, and then suddenly your kid is going to school and he's going to be having 5 classes per week of English, and you don't know the language and you don't understand, then people are going to be like, oh, I don't understand this, I don't like this. It's going to reject the language. So I think that that's one of the difficulties that we have, that parents, they don't understand, or they're afraid, or just because they don't know the language, they are kind of, they refuse like to get involved, or the teacher doesn't know how to make the parents involved in the class, because it goes both ways, right? So those, I would say, would be some of the difficulties that we have. A teacher needs to work like 40 something hours per week, and sometimes they don't have like enough hours in one school, so they have like some hours in this school, and then they have to move to another school and to another school. And last a couple of weeks I met a teacher that she works in one single room school. Well, she works like in 5 single room schools, because she has like 5 hours here, 5 hours here, 5. So she has to move all week to different places, and it's difficult. It's difficult. So some different programs have been developing and tested in the country to see how can we deliver the English in all the different contexts that we have in Costa Rica. But I can mention a lot more, but I think that's more than enough, having in this moment.
It's more than enough. I have to say thank you for your experiences, for your experience in these words. Just to wrap up all this information, I want to ask you all, starting with Mr. Strot, Mr. Rick, what are for you, Mr. Rick, some of these, I like to call them gems, like little gems that can give us a little bit more tools, abilities to create a better environment that you would recommend to us, to the future teachers, to seek to improve our professional careers?
I'll mention two. The first one is any works by Stephen Krashen, Krashen. He's a linguist and professor emeritus at the University of California. I find his research has informed me in my teaching in ESL throughout my career. So I would say any of the books by Stephen Krashen about his research. And then when it comes to curriculum, the last 10 years, I've been very impressed by the SIOP model, SIOP. It comes from a research program called Sheltered Instruction Operation Protocol. That's where the SIOP comes from. But it is a cognitive, comprehensible, input-based type of second language program. And I have found that our student teachers find that to be a very understandable framework on which they can build their lesson plans. Like I said, it's based on current research in the field, and I have found that to be, again, one that our teachers can take into the field and use immediately to teach content to their students using ESL. It's all about teaching content, basically, teaching academics to students who are from other language backgrounds. So I'd mention those two, the SIOP model, SIOP, and the primary author of that is Dr. Echevarria. Am I saying that right, Tracey? Okay. And then, of course, Stephen Krashen as a linguist and philosopher in ESL.
Well, perfect. I'll put this information in the description episode. Now, Ms. Jones, what are these resources or readings, key readings or resources that would you recommend the students or public in general?
Yeah, so of course I echo what Mr. Rick has shared. Definitely Krashen, and I teach the SIOP method to my students as well. And both of those are just very accessible. I feel like Krashen's writing is accessible to students at many levels, and so is the methodology in that text. I also wanted to recommend, and you can find many of her videos on YouTube, Dr. Carol Salva, S-A-L-V-A. And she is an ESL teacher, and she has amazing short videos that I think that, and she videos her own students to give an idea of if her teaching methods are effective. She interviews her students, and some of them are newcomers to the United States who have very little English proficiency. And then some of them are more advanced. And I think that that's interesting for students who are going to teach English to see those different proficiencies in English as well. And I was going to share a couple of other sort of novels that I think are great for teachers who are going to teach English, and especially in Costa Ricans. Costa Rican students might even see reflections of themselves in a couple of these. So one of them is Como las hermanas Garcia perdieron sus acentos, how the Garcia girls lost their accents. And it's by Julia Alvarez. And it's a family of 4 girls who immigrated to the United States. And it's really fascinating to see how their English acquisition and even their parents' English acquisition develops throughout the trajectory of that novel. And I think there's a lot that people can relate with, whether they've tried to learn a language or not. And another one that I think is of interest, especially maybe working with immigrant students or their families, is a novel by Reina Grande, and it's called The Distance Between Us, The Distance Between Us. And it's very powerful about her, really her autobiography of her life as an immigrant student and human being in the US. And then I always think if you are having activities with children, that the children should see reflections of themselves in the books. And so, I mean, this is one that I have used. It's called I'm New Here, and there are many different ethnicities that are very clear in cultural backgrounds of children and images of children from these backgrounds. And that is by Anne Sibley O'Brien. I can send the info. And one that I always use if I'm, working with my with Latino students here in the U.S. is really anything by Gary Soto. This one is about a tradition of making tamales, which are different in Costa Rica than they are in Mexico, right, close to Texas. But anything by Gary Soto is very reflective of Latino culture, and kids can see themselves in the books, and I think that's super important. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I will be putting all this information in the description so the listener can reference it and look for it afterwards. Miss Isa, teacher, profe, I want to ask you, what are your key resources, your gems that any future teacher or any teacher need to read or reference, or just to know in order to improve their career?
Well, I've been looking for information lately for my students, and I found in a book that is called Principles of Language Learning and Teaching, that is from Douglas Brown. It's interesting. It has very interesting things that teachers and we are teaching a language, we can take into account. There are other books, like, for example, and these ones are in Spanish, but there's one that is called El Valor de Educar, de Fernando Sabater. Beautiful. And there is another one that is called La Escuela y el Maestro de Paulo Freire y la Pasión de Enseñar, that I think that we as teachers, we need to connect to that romantic part of the teaching, because I think we do need in this nowadays, with all the technology, with parents having to work, both of them, and not being at home, and the kids by themselves, and I think we need to connect with that part. I do recommend teachers to have their little library in their houses, and have storybooks, and then you learn a lot about culture and different parts of the world, and then not just because you want to teach them what is happening in other countries, but also because you want to tell them what we have is also nice, and it's also important to enrich our identity with our country, because I think that's important. Not because I'm an English teacher, it means that I have to say like, oh, everything in my country is ugly or bad or this or that. But I think that as an English teacher, my job is also just to show that we are a good country, that we need a lot of things to improve, but we are a good country. So I always read this book, The Name Jar, and that's a good one. And I have, of course, I have classic storybooks, and like Dr. Seuss, of course. And I always take storybooks into my classes, even to teach science. Yesterday we were doing a demonstration class for science, and we were reading The Tiny Seed by Eric Carle. Eric Carle, all his stories are great. And then you can contextualize those stories into our context, Costa Rica. And then we read the story, we learn about those animals. Now let's make our book. And then everybody makes about their favorite animal here in Costa Rica. And then we make our version of a storybook. So I think that those will be my suggestions. Fernando Sabater, Maturana, of course, Paulo Freire, with esa pasión de enseñar, and storybooks. And teachers should read storybooks and find the beauty and the magic in them.
Thank you so much. Now, to finish this episode, I want to hear any final message can provide to us, to students that want to be the best teacher ever. Mr. Strot, what would be the final message that you can give to your student?
My final message is that if you cannot provide comprehensible input to your students, input that they understand in English, that's comprehensible to them, whatever you need to do to make it comprehensible, as Prof. Isabel was saying, that books, objects, things in the environment, whatever it may be, that's the key to really learning English, is having somebody provide that comprehensible input. That's one thing. And the second thing would be with your beginners, to respect the fact that they may need a silent period, a period in which they're listening to the language, but are not being required to speak it until they're ready. So those two things, that respecting with beginners, that period of that silent period that they may need, and then the extreme importance of making sure that whatever input in English you provide is comprehensible, understandable to your students.
Thank you so much. Ms. Jones, what would be this final message that you can provide to us, to students that want to give this quality, to provide this quality in education?
Yes, absolutely. I think that, one of education's oldest theorists, John Dewey, said that the classroom should be a laboratory, right? Where there's experimentation going on. And when I think about an experiment, I think about something that's very hands-on. So even though language might seem like this abstract element, right, that kind of floats in the air and somehow we make meaning of it, making language tasks hands-on can be very, very meaningful, right? So something very simple as I will bring in a toy, Mr. Potato Head. It's a classic toy, right? And I put on all of the body parts and I dress my Mr. Potato Head, and he looks very handsome at the end. And it's silly, but whether I'm doing that for my Spanish students or my ESL students, it's meaningful, it's quick, and they see it. And then they each have their own where they need to create that for themselves. And maybe they create a personality, and maybe we tell a story about this little figure we've created, and extend the language lesson in that way. But initially, even like you were saying, vocabulary in context, right there in the classroom, you've got body parts and colors and clothing, and all in this very quick lesson that is hands-on and task-based. And when I look at my teaching evaluations that students do for me for the end of the semester, the things that are most memorable for them are when there was fun and joy and activity, right? So I will do YouTube videos with Zumba dances, right? So we learn the song, but then we also learn the dance, and maybe we get a little exercise too. But that can be for any age, right? All of these different resources that we have at our fingertips, either with or without technology, are meaningful to students, because we want that memory there. We want that cognitive memory to be activated, so that it sticks with them, right? And the final thing I would say, that a lot of the most recent research, especially in the last 20 years, there's a theorist, linguist, her name is Meryl Swain, Swain, and she talks about the importance of output. So, once you have students who have been through the silent period and have had some experience with English in the classroom and maybe over various years, we want to obligate students to use it, right? And get away from those reading and writing activities, like you were saying, and get into that oral production of the language. And whether it's singing or whether it's talking with a partner, the interaction and the output are how you get better at speaking a language. My Spanish students aren't going to get better at speaking Spanish if I stand up there and speak Spanish for 50 minutes. They need to speak Spanish, right? And it's the same thing with any language, especially, and then with English, to get them producing the language. And that takes work. As a teacher, you need to create the activities that that make that happen. So the social interaction in the language is a big deal.
Well, thank you so much. And now, last but not least, Miss Isa, any final message that you can provide to us, the students that want to be the best teacher ever?
This is what I always say to my students. Be the teacher that you would like your own children to have. And how can you do that? Respect them as what they are. They're human beings full of skills. And they need to move in the classroom. They do need to have fun. And if they have fun, they would learn. So they need dynamic activities. And I always tell my students, when you are in the classroom, always, every situation that happens in the classroom is an opportunity for your students to use the language. Always. So if you're making a line to go to the lunchroom, you can talk in English. If something falls on the floor, then you can talk in English. Then the kids can talk in English. And then it's a constant repetition. And then that will be body language. For me, it's important, very important. And to go beyond the notebook and the textbook. And I don't really believe in evaluation like final product of a process. I do believe in the assessment of the whole process. So that means that I do need to look at my students and look at what they are. Individuals, that they are people that come from different places, that they have different needs, and that they have different skills. And maybe what they need is just a little push after their silent period in order to just to open their wings and fly. So I think that the system sometimes is overwhelming and tiring. Sometimes teachers feel burned out because of the administrative processes and things that they have to do. But I do think that we need to have inside us this flame, always there, lighting, like Rudolf Steiner would say, that every kid has a light inside, and the teachers have a light inside too that need to shine, and we do need to shine for our students. That'll be it.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here. We are completely grateful for having this episode, the first episode in English, the first English spoken episode of the Umbrella podcast. Once again, thank you so much for your time, and that will be it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see everybody. Thank you.